The William Nylander deal is done. What does it mean for the player? Can the Leafs make it work in their cap structure? And what is Treliving's next order of business? We'll discuss all of that and tee up tonight's Leafs and Sharks game on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're going down to the Leaf game tonight, got Leafs and Sharks. It'll be William Nylander's first game since signing his big deal. Perhaps a big outing could be coming from him tonight. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at Gametime and get $20 off your ticket purchase. So potentially you could do that if you plan on going to the game. It's done, Dave. It's done. The deal has been signed, sealed, and delivered. William Nylander will be a Maple Leaf for the next 8 years. The deal is as reported. So, Elliot Friedman was correct where, he said he's hearing 8 years, $11.5 million, which totals $92 million. That is the final number for William Nylander. And there's a lot more that goes into it, and we'll kind of dive into the contract, what the pay structure is, the percentage of the cap, where it sits along the lines of, the league averages and, what this means for both the player and the team. But what is your initial, I suppose, reaction to hearing William Nylander, 8 years, $11.5 million, it's done?
Well, essentially that's it. Like, it's done. We can now basically look forward to the rest of the next negotiation, I guess, is the way about it, right? Like, and how the heck is this all going to work?
Yeah.
That's the big question, right? Sorry. But, I didn't have any really thought into Nylander even this being an 8-year deal, right? I thought that after Matthews had signed his can't even call it a long-term extension, his mid-extension, right? Yeah. That maybe Nylander would take that route and potentially, try to maximize, his next deal, right? Something that's with the cap going up and things like that.
That final deal. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, you think about his age, how many more kicks at the can is he going to get? This is going to be the best opportunity for him to get that contract. And just hearing the discourse online is like how, Nylander didn't do the Leafs any favors, which we're honest here. He didn't really do them any favors.
He got everything he wanted. Like,
exactly.
It's $11.5 million, which is an extremely high number.
Yes.
Next year, he'll be the 5th highest paid player in the NHL. Like, that's how high of a number it is. He got full term, full 8 years, $92 million fully guaranteed. He got $69 million of it, which is 75% of the contract as signing bonus at that. So every July 1st, he's going to get a fat paycheck right at the start of the league year. So that he didn't have to fight for. He got a full move. It was a full no trade. Legitimately everything that he could have possibly wanted, he got in this deal. So no, he did zero favors for the Maple Leafs. But I don't necessarily think that means that Toronto are big losers in this deal either. And again, we'll get to the team, what this means for the team a little bit later. But in terms of William Nylander and what this means for him, I mean, first of all, congrats. Like, the reason why William Nylander put himself in this position is because he bet on himself this summer. Like, they wanted to sign him to a contract in the range of, $9-ish million. We know this. And he said, no, I think I'm worth more than that. And I'll show you and I'll prove that I'm worth more than that. And within 37 games, the guy's gone out. He's put up 21 goals, put up 54 points, and he's playing over 2.5 more minutes per game. He's killing penalties. He's showing that he has the ability to play more of a 200-foot game. Is there still some growing pains there? Is he necessarily Mark Stone? No, obviously, when it comes to being a defensive player, but he can do it when he wants to. And it looks like he's going to be given more opportunity to do that. Here's what I hate about these types of days and these types of contracts is that you look at a guy like William Nylander, and we've been saying all season long, this is the team's MVP. He's been the best player for the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is saying something because they got a 30 goal scorer, the league's leading a goal scorer on their squad. Yet many people in Leafs Nation would sit here and say, hey, Nylander's been the MVP, though. He's been the more consistent player. The guy has, 34 of the 37 games he's registered a point. Like, he's been the beacon of consistency. And instead of celebrating this contract, the fact that he's going to be here for 8 more seasons, we've got many, many more seasons of Willie greatness, hopefully going forward. The automatically we go straight to overpayment. And now it goes from what should be a happy occasion, this great player sticking around in Toronto for 8 more years, to now we've overpaid for him and it screwed up the team's cap structure. What does this mean now for Marner's contract? What's he going to ask for? Yada, yada, yada. It is just, it's annoying. I get it. We have to talk about it because it does factor into the team's success ultimately, obviously in a hard cap era, but it is just so annoying that it always turns into that. And again, we are part of the problem. We are going to talk about it. We have to talk about it. But the fact that we are made to because of the salary cap system is what's annoying about it.
Yeah, most other sports, when you think about what players sign for,
dude, Ohtani signed for $700 million. $700 million. We're talking about $92 million. Imagine your team just paid $700 million for a player that was celebrated like no tomorrow. Like, everyone is like, oh yeah, let's go ask me a Dodgers fan. It's like, it's too much money. That's insane. Like, that's going to cripple this team. It doesn't happen. I get it. There's no cap in baseball, but there's a luxury tax, might add. But, here in Toronto, it's like, oh, he signed for too much money. That means the team's not going to have success. It's really annoying how that's automatically the conversation.
The Dodgers also signed a pitcher for 12 years, over $300 million, without even stepping foot on an MLB mound. Just
yeah. Honestly, it's wild. But anyways,
the thing is, like the money aside, like, look, is it a lot of money? Yeah, but guess what? The Leafs are also worth over $2 billion as a franchise. They're not concerned about how much money they're paying William Nylander.
No,
it's just yes. In the NHL's world, where they want to keep that parity alive with the teams that can't pay what the big top franchise can pay. That's what the salary cap was brought in for, right? And so that's the unfortunate part of the business, right? And Brad Treliving kind of talked about that a little bit here today when he was talking about the deal and saying, yeah, you guys are going to debate how much the deal's worth and things like that. That's your job. But when you have a chance to sign a good player, you sign them.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, like he had to get it done because, and as Elliot Friedman reported in 32 Thoughts, they were trying to see what a Nylander trade, if they could trade Nylander for a defenseman. But guess what? When you take this player into the final year of the deal and there's no guarantees the guy's going to sign with the new team you're trading for, the trade value is not there. So all the people who are like, you could have traded Nylander, that theory has been debunked because you're getting pennies on the dollar for a Nylander, right?
Yeah. It's a fair point, obviously. So that leaves with, okay, either we're gonna, go down to the wire with this guy and he can play out the rest of the year. We can try and hammer out a deal. Obviously, today they felt that this was a deal that the Leafs were comfortable in finally signing. It does seem as though it's like Nylander's camp put a figure on the table at one point and basically said, call us when you're ready. Leafs called this week. They were ready to lock him in and make that happen. It's going to be 13.1% of the cap. So 13.1% of the cap at the time of the deal, which is less than Marner. It is less than Marner. We look at percentage of the cap. It's less than Pasternak. It's less than Panarin. So when you look at the total, the AAV and the total, yeah, it's more money than what those guys got. But when you look at percentage of the cap, it's not as much technically. So depending on how you want to look at it, is this a way to spin it in a positive direction so that it's under that Pasternak number? Okay, sure, you can argue it that way. But this is 2023, 2024 now, Dave. It's been 2024 for about a week. This is in modern day how players and how agents and how teams evaluate payment. It's not the AAV necessarily. A lot of the time they're looking at the cap structure and the percentage of the cap. And he is under some of those players. Is he making more money? Yes, but he's under in terms of a percentage here. In terms of how this deal is structured, though, Dave, I found it very interesting. Like again, he gets a lot of this 69 million, 75% of the contract is coming via signing bonuses, but he's going to make 13.5 million over the next 2 years. Then he's going to make 12.5 million. And then it kind of goes down from there. I saw a lot of people saying, oh, wow, it's a front loaded. It's not as front loaded as I thought. Cause when I went and looked at it, I mean, he's still making 10 and 9 million in years 7 and 8 of the deal. This isn't a classic, like that's not a deal that's going to be easy to trade down the road, I guess is what I'm saying. So he didn't really get front loaded all that much money. It's pretty well balanced throughout, which kind of surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, like there's years, I think like years 3 and 4, he's getting $1 million in salary, and then the rest in salary, and the rest in signing bonus. Like it's like 2 years on, 2 years off. It's weird. It's not like
It's
Matthews, Marner, and Tavares that got all of it, as we said, up front, and then the last few years, it's not really in the same way.
Exactly, which is kind of why it is strange to look at. Like that was something that Kyle Dubas was very keen on, right? He was very much, hey, let's give these guys early on these bonus money. We'll pay them just even in terms of total salary, not even necessarily signing bonus or regular season salary. Just in general, they like to pay these guys who later in their deals they were only making like X amount of money. Like the reason why they were able to move on from some of these players is because their actual dollars were significantly less than what their, annual average value was, their AAV. And I thought maybe that would be a scenario where, in year 7 and 8, if Nylander at 34, 35 years old has taken a dip, okay, if he's only making 2-3 million in salary, that would be easier to trade, but he's not. He's making $9-10 million in the final 2 years. That's not an easy contract to move. So it's almost like you could, not that the Leafs want to trade Nylander. Obviously, they just signed him to 8 years. They want to be in a long-term partnership. But down the road, if things start to go off the rails, it also is a very difficult asset to trade, which is not what the Leafs typically do. Typically, you'll see years, 7 and 8 of a long-term deal be sub 5 million and really front load the first 3-4 years of that contract. Not this case here, which I thought was kind of interesting. All right, let's take a break. Let's come back and let's talk about how this will impact the Leafs team cap structure. So we'll look at it from a Maple Leafs perspective, and that's when we can get into, the cap dollars and what this means going forward. And because they're going back to the well again, right? They're the core four now locked up long term, all making double digits. Can they win with this? We'll discuss that on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 wager. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find their bets on the new Explore tab. You can also make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find the popular parlays of the day. There's so many more opportunities to bet as well. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official sponsor of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. We're reacting to breaking news today about William Nylander signing a new contract, 8 years, $92 million in total, and AAV of $11.5 million. Just a reminder, we are a daily Maple Leafs podcast, by the way, and we do content like this year round. We don't take a break in the summer. We keep it rolling. We have content coming out to you each weekday, Monday through Friday. So make sure that you are subscribed to the Locked On Leafs podcast, wherever you get your audio podcast, also up on YouTube for that daily content. All right. So 11.25 is the AAV, Dave.
11.5.
Sorry, 11.5. 11.5 is the AAV. As of now, if you look at next season, the Leafs will have 4 of the top 10 highest paid players on their team. Matthew at 13.5, Nylander at 11.5, Tavares at 11, and then Marner at 10.9. It's kind of wild.
Did you know they just want to be the Dodgers of the NHL?
I mean, well, let's win some championships like the Dodgers have done. Like, that's what I'm saying, Brooksy. It is kind of wild. And the problem is, and this is why we always, when I like to preference when talking negatively about this contract. I do want to say, as an individual, I think Nylander, is he worth in the range of 11.5 million? Yeah, probably. He's a top 5 scorer right now. His numbers have been dynamite this year and really the last 2 years. So he's proven, that last year wasn't a fluke. He's actually taken another step this season and he's done some really good things. So do I think he's worth this money? Sure. But can the Leafs afford to pay him this money and then also make sure that Matthews gets his, Tavares is getting 11, and Marner is getting 10.9 next year, but he's up for a new contract extension. And what's that going to look like? That's where you look at that 11.5 and you're like, ugh. Can that work for the Maple Leafs? That's the big ultimate question, because you look at those 4 players, Matthews, Nylander, Tavares, and Marner, that totals $46.65 million next year. That's 53% of this team's total salary cap.
Yeah, it's Brandon Prindham needs to be, if anyone deserves to be paid the most on this Leafs team, probably Brandon Prindham, because he's the one that's had to figure out this jigsaw puzzle.
Well, has he figured out this jigsaw puzzle? Look, I love Pridham. Don't get me wrong. I've had many interactions with Brandon Pridham. He's a great guy. But when you say he's had to figure out this jigsaw puzzle, what have they figured out? They haven't won anything. What have they figured out? They've paid everybody, and then they're like, okay, we'll just pay all these other scrubs to come in and not do anything for us. So what actually has he done? What puzzle has he fit?
Well, he's found a way to have to make this roster work, right?
But has it worked? That's my question, Dave. What has worked? What have they done?
Well, that's the thing.
So why go back to the well? Why continue to go down this road if it hasn't worked? Is it now going to work all of a sudden 7-8 years later?
So here's the thing, but Brandon Pridham's job is to make the decisions that the GM makes work. That's what I'm trying to say. This isn't Brandon Pridham's fault that the Leafs haven't won a cup. It's Dubas, Treliving, and can't put Treliving because year's not done yet. But Shanahan and Dubas that had this plan to lock in this core 4. So that's what I'm saying. Like, Brandon Pridham has been said, all right, we need to get Nylander done. This is the number. Can you make the roster work? And he's done. Like, when they want to go out and make trades and get things done, he's the one that's got to figure out all the pieces to get that done. That's what I'm saying.
Sure. Anyways, we'll agree to disagree on that. Like, it's a moot point regardless. But still, the fact that they've given 4 players 53%. If you even want to add like Morgan Riley's money in there, that's 5 players making 61.7% of their cap. Like, when you look at other teams around the NHL and you look at when they've won, how they've won Stanley Cups, right? The last few seasons, the Tampas, the Colorados, the Vegases. I mean, they got deep rosters, very deep rosters.
Mhm.
And, they've got third and fourth line players who are making a little bit of money, but they're very good players. Like Will Carrier is a terrific fourth line player. William Karlsson is like their third line center out in Vegas. He is a terrific third line center. They've got Zach Whitecloud making 2.5 million as their third pair defenseman. He's a terrific third pair guy. Like they've got a lot of depth, like Sorelli for a while, Nick Paul out in Tampa Bay. And when you're thinking about guys, Nichushkin was a depth player who came up big for the Colorado Avalanche that year. They've had so many guys just like step up on teams that have won, and they're because they're able to insulate those top players with quality bottom six guys because they're able to fit that within their cap structure. The Leafs haven't been able to do that. Like they're trying to get the most out of their Bobby McMahons. They're trying to get the most. They've had to sign like Gio to an $800,000 contract. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to get the most now out of, let's say, like a Simone Benoit, right? So that's where it is. It's you can question the idea behind making this signing because it's okay. You've already done this and you've put yourself in a bind, and then the conversation year after year is, well, now there's no money for defense. Well, now there's really no money for defense because you just gave Nylander an extra like $5 million than you have over the course of the last few years. Like you just lost all that, cap rise, the flexibility with Matthews and Nylander. So you didn't gain anything now. Now you haven't really gained a whole lot in your, with the cap rising. And somehow you got to put together basically half of your roster still.
Well, the big issue here, and when you bring up the Tampas and Vegas, they also drafted or brought in young guys that weren't making a lot of money. Like you think about Brain Point didn't start making his over $9 million until after Tampa won their cups, right? He was still making like half, well, not about half, less than that when they were on those runs, right? You think about guys they had brought in, like the Chernak wasn't making what he was making, like that's how those teams were able to do it, right? Yes, they had their high pay players, but they had good young players. And to me, that speaks more to the failure of the Leafs to draft and develop guys, right?
Well, sure, but it's like somewhat like Braden Point when he signed his $5-6 million deal, that second contract. He was a great player when he signed that deal. Like Braden Point was already a Stanley Cup, caliber winning player when he made that deal. But they decided, hey, we're putting our feet in the ground and we're not going to give you all this money. That didn't happen with Toronto. They just gave everyone the money despite winning. At least when Braden Point and Kucherov and all them got paid at the end of the day, Sorelli got paid. They were already multi-time Stanley Cup champions. So, that's when they all got their money. Now for the Maple Leafs, they just continue. Now they got their money on their second deals. They won one singular round throughout that entire, tenure since their second contracts were signed. And all of a sudden now they're jumping back in and signing for even more money now. Like where's the earned, like, I don't know. It's
Well, see, the issue with that thinking though is with Nylander, it was either you sign him or you let him go, or you trade him for Panzo or let him go.
sure, but what can you, hey, so what happens if you let him go?
Who you have the money to, yes, you get, well, you don't get the 11.5. You have to think about,
Well, you do. You have an extra 11.5 million. Yes, you do.
okay, you have the 11.5. Who are you signing in free agency or wherever to that 11.5 to really make that impact?
So I would have to go and look, like, to maybe this is an exercise we could do, some other time later this week, perhaps, where we look and we try and find some guys. But There are a lot of players that are making, between 4 and 5 million bucks. You essentially can package 2 or 3 of those guys together, and all of a sudden now you've got 3 players that builds out your depth, as opposed to one player up at the top of the food chain. And he's not
Okay.
at the top. He's like number 3. you know?
But here's the thing, like it's not just a Nylander thing. It's the fact that it's a collection of players that you have that are making all that money. The biggest
100%. Right. Well, we're looking at it as from a team perspective. I'm not looking at this from Nylander. I'm looking at the team. How can you, as a team, the Maple Leafs, sit here and say we're going to pay this guy 11.5 million bucks, and that's best for the team? It's not. It's not the best use of 11.5 million. It just flat out isn't. And
the mistake
they gave him everything he wanted. Everything. Terms, dollars, salary bonus, structure, everything. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you with killer last-minute deals, all in pricing, views from receipt, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from receipt before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Gametime has deals on tickets right up until the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last minute seats, and the Gametime guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Well, like the mistake was made back after Nylander has signed for his $6.9 million, which no one's arguing now that contract. Nobody was arguing that he wasn't worth that contract. Maybe, yeah, that first year where he comes back and he was struggling to get things going. But after that, he far exceeded that value. The problem was he had that deal, and then you could not get the other 2 to get anywhere close to that what you got for.
Yep.
That's where the mistake was made.
For sure.
And once you gave Matthews and Marner their money, you can't then just say, all right, now take less. That's the problem there.
Or you can. You can.
You can. Well, Matthews, let's say, I don't think we're complaining about what Matthews signed for. There's one player that's been the biggest problem with all of this, and that's Mitch Marner.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here. Matthews at least was a 60 goals, right? Playing at an MVP level. Mitch Marner has done good things, but can we say that he was a $10.9 million player?
Earlier in his career, no. I think at times you've seen that at times, but has he been that throughout the duration of the contract in the way that Matthews was? No, I don't think he was. But is Nylander going to be an $11.5 million player throughout the duration of his contract? I don't think so. I mean, you look at once he gets over the hill, once he gets to 33, 34, 35 years old, is he still going to produce, at a top 5 rate? And I know percentage of cap that 11.5 won't mean as much at that point where the cap will be. It'll be, well into the $100,000 or $100 million range is what you are going to project it to be at that point, 5-6 years down the road. But still, that's kind of what you're looking at this number. Is he going to be worth at least 11.5 every single year? If not, how do you make that, give him that deal? I don't know. It sounds like I'm hating on Nylander for taking this money.
You kind of are, but I understand
what I'm not saying. Like that. My point is, like, Nylander can ask for whatever the hell he wants. Is he worth $11.5 million? Yes, but can the Leafs afford to give him $11.5 million? No, and these are the reasons why they shouldn't have given it to him. Did he earn it? Does he deserve it? Yes, I believe so. But should the Leafs have caved and completely given him everything that he wanted? That's where I question what's going on here. And because again, like you mentioned, they made this mistake years ago with Matthews and Marner. You're making the same mistake again. I thought you're supposed to learn from your mistakes. Did Brendan Shanahan learn? No, he continues to just go after it, try and win with this group. And what have you gotten out of it so far? Nothing. But everyone keeps padding their bank accounts. Like it just, again, he's a great player. And this is why I hate that this is where the conversation always goes, and this is what the salary cap does. If this was baseball, I wouldn't care. Hell yeah, sign me up. Nylander, $11.5 million. Great. I think that he's worth it. He could give you that type of value. But what else could you get around the NHL for $11.5 million to build out the depth in your lineup? Like that's ultimately where I look at that and I think, like here's a good example. Okay. Look at who was I going to bring up here? Not Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois. Look at what the Winnipeg Jets did with Pierre-Luc Dubois last year, right? Like he wanted a crazy contract or he wasn't going to sign there. So I said, okay, we're just going to move on from you. Like he was their, like a number one.
Sign there. That's the thing though.
He didn't want to sign there. I get that, but still, okay, let's look at Bo Horvat then.
There you
Bo
go.
Horvat was the captain of the Vancouver Canucks, and he wanted to make a dollar figure that the Canucks clearly were not comfortable giving him.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately they trade him. Well, that now has turned into Filip Hronek and like Aatu Ratu still there. Beauvillier, they ended up moving on, but essentially they traded the big piece is Hronek. The team is better off after making that deal. Like, because Hronek fit what they needed. They needed a right shot defenseman to upgrade that blue line. Right?
Well,
Hronek through the first round pick. Let me. It turned into Hronek, right? Because it was for a first round pick, Ratu and Beauvillier. They traded Beauvillier for a fifth rounder a couple of weeks ago, and they traded that first rounder to Detroit last year for Filip Hronek. So that's how it became Hronek, right? So what I'm saying here is, could you do something similar with the Leafs where it's like, okay, Nylander's traded for player X and B, and what if that just makes this team better because it fills more of a need than another, goal scorer essentially, or another playmaker. Like you've got Matthews, you've got Marner, you've got Tavares. Nyes looks like he's a pretty good player. You could play Max Domi up the lineup a little bit if you needed to. He could play in your top six, I believe. He's got that type of skill level. He leads the NHL in assists, at primary assists at 5-on-5. So, you could get that type of production throughout your lineup, but no one else on this team could be a top pair defenseman. Right. So that's where it's okay. What else could you get for that $11.5 million? Could you structure it differently? This team differently?
I just have to think that it's all, you can go out and say, you know what, we're walking away. We're going to put that money best elsewhere. But it's also a matter of, are those guys out there that you can bring in? Right.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't know that Filip Hronek was available last year at the trade deadline. Did you?
No.
That was a big surprising trade that happened. That was a big surprise, but Vancouver called around and they were able to come up with, a deal that enticed Detroit into making that trade, and it's turned out to be for the better. Did you know that Gabe Vilardi was available in LA last year? Or Alex Iafallo? Was it Iafallo who got dealt there? Was he part of that trade, or was it the other guy? I get them mixed up. There's like 4 million.
It was Iafallo, Vilardi,
Kupari, and someone else. So, like, did you know those guys were available? No, but you made the trades, and all of a sudden, it filled out your lineup, and it worked. I'll give you another example that was a different sport, obviously, but people here in Toronto will remember it. Remember the Rudy Gay trade? Rudy Gay was a star. He was a star player, but they traded him away and traded him for more depth pieces. Not necessarily this is what I think the Leafs should do, but it's another example of how just because you have a star player doesn't mean you have to keep him and you have to pay whatever means necessary to keep him here, because What's the alternative? Well, maybe the alternative is, okay, yeah, you can turn one star player into four good players, but those good players elevate those around you. It elevates your fourth line, your third line, and all of a sudden you've got way better depth in your team, and that's how guys are winning Stanley Cups. Go look at exactly how things happened in Vegas. Like I said, they've got a far better third and fourth line. Do they? Who's the Nylander in Vegas? Marchessault?
Is it
What's Marchessault making?
He's making 5. Well, he's also in the last year of his deal at $5 million.
Still, my point is, like, would you consider him their third best forward?
Right now, yeah, I'd say
Yeah,
so.
and that's Nylander, and that's the difference. You're paying your third best forward 11.5 million as opposed to 5 million, and then that gives them the Golden Knights an extra 6 to go elsewhere.
Going into the season, Nylander was the third best forward. That's not this season, though.
Okay, but going forward, do you still expect for him to be the best forward on this team?
Second best.
Do you think William Nylander is better than Mitch Marner?
Right now, I do. I think he
No. When all's said and done, when this 8-year deal is done, if they both sign 8-year deals, do you believe that Nylander will outperform Marner over the next 8 years?
If I'm looking at regular season and playoffs, yes, I do. Because Marner hasn't brought in the playoffs. Nylander actually has brought in the playoffs.
That's a good point. I guess you could sit here and respect that the Leafs finally, at least Nylander has given you some playoff performances, and you're paying, a guy who has produced in the playoffs, unlike, these other guys who struggled. So that is a solid point.
Now, Marner, yes, he has the 200-foot game, but guess what? You can get guys. You just brought up the idea of bringing up other guys that can play in those areas and do it at a lot less money. For Mitch Marner, yes, it's great that he's a 200-foot player. I don't need Mitch Marner on the penalty kill. I could pay someone else to pay him on the penalty kill because then that saves Marner for when he's supposed to be at his best, which is as an offensive player, right?
Can you, though, if you're paying him $11 million?
Well, that's the thing. Now, can you envision Mitch Marner being an $11 million player going forward, where he's just over a point per game? Nylander's far.
He's not. He's like inching toward 100 points a season.
But this year he's really taken a step back, right?
Yeah, but I think this year's more the outlier than like. I still believe that Marner's a better player than Nylander. Like, overall, I think Marner's still a better player than Willie.
I just see things in Nylander's game that gives me more belief that he can improve his game even more. I don't think Nylander, we've seen him take steps and do things that I don't think Mitch Marner will be willing to do, especially as an offensive player.
They're kind of different players. Like Nylander can play a power forward role. Like, he's a guy who can put his shoulder down and take it to the net, but that's not Marner's game, right? Like, Marner's definitely more of a dynamic, playmaker. He's more smooth. He's got, the crazy stick handles, and he can set guys up.
Well, you shared with me that tweet from Megan Chaika. Maybe I'll bring it up now.
Yeah.
Let me bring that up. That's not that
wrong one. We'll get to that later.
But look at this right here. You've got William Nylander here. In terms of the Leafs ranking, the one I looked at here, passes the slot. Yes, Marner first. He's second.
Yep.
Pass inner slot. He's right behind Marner in that one. Like, it's not like he's far behind from Marner in doing those things.
Yeah, I think also when you look at those, and maybe, this is going against both of those players, but you look at the two centermen that they've played with this year, those guys go to the slot, right? Like Matthews and Tavares, like, those guys are going to go right to the slot. So if you're making passes to those players, that's kind of where they're going to end up being. And look, I'm not saying that Nylander's not a terrific playmaker and a dynamic player. I think he is. Marner, when he is confident, I think Marner at his best is better than Willie at his best, I think, is the way that I'm kind of looking at it. Who has the higher ceiling? For me, I think it is Mitch Marner. And we've seen it. Like Marner, at times you've sat there and said, this guy looks like he could be legitimately like a Hart Trophy candidate. As good as Willie has been this year, have you once said this guy could potentially be in the Hart conversation? I don't think so. I don't
Not
think he has
this year, but
no, but he's never ever once been in that conversation.
no,
Marner, we've said that about multiple times. When he's at his best, he's
two
so,
years we've seen him be at that level for sure.
like the year Matthews hit 60, Marner was a big part of that. Massive part of that. And last year, Marner had 99 points. Like, that's a big number, man. Big number.
But here's the thing, and that's the thing you have to consider, when we're talking about why this team we're trying to think about the way this team moves forward, especially trying to build a contender that can win a cup. Guys have to perform. The guys you're paying also have to perform in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like if Marner goes out and has a good playoff performance, guess what? The Leafs aren't gonna get bounced early.
Yep, probably.
If he has a dud, in my opinion, that speaks a lot to his limitations as a player.
Well, if he goes out and he dominates, you think that they win playoff games?
They should, yes.
They didn't when Willie did it, though.
Well, that's because he was the only one. And that's the issue with this team, is that when one guy does it, but the other guys don't, and that's become the imbalance that we were speaking about, right? Is that when one guy doesn't and the other guys don't, and what I'm speaking about that is Nylander does, Matthews and Marner don't.
Right.
And that's been the issue. I can't. It's one thing to say Nylander's done it, but then they haven't moved on. Well, that's because the two guys that are being paid more than him to produce haven't done it.
Yeah, and I guess the reason why I brought Marner up into this conversation is because he's next up now, right? Like next year, that's going to be the conversation. Starting July 1st, Mitch Marner is eligible for a contract extension. If they don't win a championship this year, if it's another first or second round exit, and Marner's, kind of, he's Mitch Marner. He's okay. He's good, not great in the playoffs. What's that conversation going to be like in the summer? And Mitch Marner, you damn well know that Mitch Marner of all people, he's not taking less than Willie.
Yeah.
He's going to want more. He's going to want more money. He's going to want more money. And that's where I look and I'm like, I don't know, depending on how much more, I suppose. Like, do you envision a scenario where, because Nylander's now at 11.5, like that high of a cap hit, do you envision a scenario where this team now is able to keep all four of these guys going forward? Or all three of these guys? I think Tavares is fine. Tavares is fine. But Marner,
if we're looking at past the next season, what we're talking about with Marner's deal, I think you got to have that. Like, that's where if you tell Mitch, this is the dollar we can do. I think this is the, and I hate to say because they haven't done it yet, but they can't budge. They cannot budge.
What makes you think that they won't, though?
Well, that's the problem. Are
you comfortable letting Marner walk?
If it means that you don't pay him more than he should be paid, yes.
Well, what should he be paid?
Pardon?
What should he be paid?
What should
two-time first team NHL team, all right winger.
Well, he's not the best winger in the league. So
100-point Selke candidate. What should he be paid?
Well, he hasn't reached 100 points, close to 100 points.
Come on now. Point per game, he's on pace for 100 2 straight years.
Like, how much more do you realistically think he can get than, like, he's in the Nylander?
I don't know what, like, again, it's
not conversation as Nylander, because guess what? Offense is nearly the same, right? Yeah, defensively, but how much more are you paying for that defense?
Oh, that's
$2 million a season for just that.
Dude, how important is defense to you?
Guess what? Then you take the money you're not going to pay Mitch Marner and you go on and you get some better defensive, reliable players.
Sure. Or you could have done that with Willie. But you're getting the defense. You're getting the defense, the defensive prowess. You're getting a Selke candidate in Marner as well.
Well, here's the thing. Marner, he's in a tough spot because he's the last one.
Yeah,
he might be licking his chops. That's fine if that's the feeling he's got. Liggins shops for his next deal. Someone will have to just say, look, we can't. I mean, obviously, we also don't know what the next cap projection is going to be. So let's keep in mind here.
We're expecting it to go up. Like the year Marner's eligible for his extension, the year that extension would kick in, the expectation is it goes up to about 90 million. So about another $2.5 million increase at that point.
But yeah, that's to me, that would be then you're saying, so how much do you think he would get? He should get.
Okay, so it's two different conversations.
Okay,
right?
even a cap percentage.
If I'm Mitch Marner, I'd probably look at Nylander's deal and I say, all right, he got 11.5. I want 12.5.
Yeah. So then the Leafs are going to have to decide, do they have the space for that? I don't know if they will. Now, we don't know what Tavares is coming in at, because you know that keeping him around will actually be beneficial, because finding a center for a decent price won't be easy. We obviously know where Tavares' limitations are.
Right.
I mean, he also made it clear he wants in Toronto.
How much longer do you think he plays center throughout this, like that next contract? How much that is he going to play center?
Well, that's the thing. Not only that, second line center. Now, you have potentially a Fraser Minton that can come in, and I don't know what his seal, if he can be a second line center. That's the issue there. But he's a guy that can, take on that center role, right, and play those minutes at center.
Yeah.
Granted that he's not traded before then.
It's true. Very, very true. I don't know. I look at this deal and it's bringing back like similar thoughts to how I felt about this team and its cap structure when they signed Tavares. I'm like, there is a lot of question marks going into next year now. Lots of question marks. Like, bring up that I sent you like the lineup that is currently under contract for next year. This is the players that are under contract next season. If you're watching or if you're listening, we have a graphic up here on YouTube of the players that are currently signed for next season. And it's just 13 players. 13 players are signed next year. And of those 13 players, they already take up 66 million, I think is the number here. Let me see 1 second. Yeah, 66 million, 66.4 million committed to these 13 players, which leaves $21 million to fill out the rest of the roster. And you can see there's a lot of holes there. Lots of holes. You're looking at, a top 6 winger. You're looking at 2 third-line players. You're looking at 2 top 4 defensemen. You're looking at another goaltender. You're looking at another third-pair defenseman. And that's even if you want to go forward with Timmins and Ryan Reeves, who are also part of this graphic right now, because technically they are paid and, NHL salary for next season. So, next year it's again, because you decided to pay Willie. It's like, all right, now we've got to pay, our middle 6 guys peanuts. You don't have the money to go big game hunting and get a top, 2 top 4 defensemen anymore. So again, you're going to be pretty thin on the blue line, most likely. And that's the decision that this team continues to make. Like, it hasn't worked for the last X amount of years that, the Shannon plan has been into effect with Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, all getting paid. And now they're all coming back up for renewal. We've seen no success, but they're going to go right back to doing what they've been doing. And that's paying 4 players 50% of the cap. And they're just going to try and figure it out the rest of the rest of the lineup. Just try and figure it out and piece it together. Hasn't worked. Has not worked. This is where I get very frustrated with the decision.
Oh, the reason why when I saw the Nylander number and you get frustrated is because now it's like we know that there's an imbalance with this team. There's been an imbalance with this team ever since they made these picks, right? How many people, when they drafted Mitch Marner, said, you know what, why didn't they draft a defenseman like Hanifin or like a Werenski with that first pick, right? No, they went for the player who had the higher ceiling. Just happened to be a forward.
To be fair, I think they had high hopes for for Stu Percy still at that point.
Oh God. But here's the issue. It's that you don't necessarily always have to pick a defenseman in the first round for them to be a good defenseman. How many defensemen in the second, third round that they try to draft years? Like
100%. It's collective, right? Like it's collective, and this is where you can also look at Kyle Dubas, and maybe this is a shot at him. They didn't really draft anyone. Like, who did they really draft in the middle rounds that has come through and that has been, their Braden Point, that has come through and has been a, like Chernak, who was also a late round player. Cirelli was a third round pick. Like, you've got all of these guys who have, burst through, who've become mid round selections, mid to late round picks, who've turned out to be quality NHLers for a lot of these teams, and they're playing on these cheap contracts, and they're able to get some production out of them. Ross Colton was a big part of, Tampa's second run there, and I think he was either on an ELC or he was a guy who would, late round pick. He was in the minors for a little bit, then they brought him back up. The original triplets were guys who were late round picks, and they ended up coming up through the minors, and then they gradually got paid until they finally won a Stanley Cup, and then they went elsewhere. Killorn got paid. Palat decided to go and get paid elsewhere. And, because the Tampa Bay Lightning knew they had a certain cap structure. They didn't want to, pay these guys for, what they couldn't get out of them anymore. Now, it's different with the Leafs, I suppose, because these dudes are still in their prime. But I don't know. I think that you have a right to question if this was the right decision. Is Willie worth that type of money? Yes. But could the Leafs afford another $11.5 million forward? Take the name out of it. Just in general, could they afford another player? Think about the stat that I gave you now we're looking at about 40 minutes ago. They have 4 of the top 10 paid players in the NHL next season. That's insane. Insane to me. But hey, they're going to try and win with it. They're going to try and roll with it. We'll see what happens. We will see.
Yeah, I mean, the problem here too is obviously that you got limited flexibility too, because these guys have no flexibility because these guys all have no movement clause.
Yeah,
like you say, is Tavares going to get moved? You think John Tavares is waiving his no movement clause?
He's your captain.
Like,
chance.
And to me, again, look at that's where you have the issue here is you don't have that flexibility just because you have these guys who are making the money, but also no movement clauses just detract from that too. So yeah, I don't know. I feel bad for Nylander because he's had such a good year. He's done everything that's been asked of him pretty much, right? And yeah, they're saying he has more to go, more to give, especially as a leader and things like that. But Nylander did what he needed to do. Now this is on the Leafs management to make it work. It's they're gonna have to. That's their burden that they have to carry. I do think though, Brad Treliving, like when you hear some of the things he said, right, which is he's the guy who gets it now has to show it. I think that's a little bit of a message, right? Giving you guys the money now, so you got to go out and show it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if Nylander turns into a Huberdeau situation where, platform year, gets the contract, and then all of a sudden falls off a cliff, we got big problems. Problems here in Toronto. That'll cripple this franchise for years if that's what happens. Now, I don't think it will. Like, I truly think that Nylander is going to perform to expectation going forward. I hope that's the case. He does seem like the type of player. He's got pride. And he just wants to be, the best player he can be. I do get that vibe from Willie, so I'm not worried about that necessarily. But if it does happen, oh boy, is that ever going to kill this team? Just absolutely kill this team. I'll give you the final word, Dave. What's the final word, final thing you want to say on this deal before we wrap things up here today?
Well, I think for me, it's Leafs Nation. If you're a Leafs fan, you guys just worry about the fact that Nylander's here for the next 8 years. I think you have to celebrate that. They got the deal done. Worry about that. Like, enjoy that. I wouldn't worry too much about the Marner stuff and things like that, because that's stuff that's not going away anytime soon. So
Yeah.
there's just no point in getting yourselves worked up about it like we might have gone a little worked up.
This doesn't feel pointed to Leafs Nation. This feels pointed to me, Dave. You're sitting here and you're like, Mike, you spend 20 minutes hooting and hollering about Mitch Marner versus Nylander. What are you doing? Let's just talk about I feel you. Apologies to everybody for that, by the way, because we did go a little overboard. We're now approaching like 55 minutes of this podcast. Spent 20 minutes talking about Marner over Nylander, which I didn't expect to get into today. Granted, this is the beauty of podcasts. You never know where conversation's going to go. And, when emotion gets into it, this is what happens. And look, hey, we're two Leaf fans, right? Like we cover this team. We have a connection to this team. We're emotional about this team. This is what's going to happen, right? This is no different than the conversation that, our listeners have with their buddies at the bar or when they're sitting on the couch watching the game. That's what I think is great about our podcast too.
Yeah. So I just think, you know what, like they got work to do. There's no doubt about that. But one thing that I think Brad Treliving had made it known too is you get the Nylander deal done. Now you know what you have to work with going forward.
True. Very true.
So,
yep. You got 21 million in space next year. 21 million in space. You've got all those holes to fill.
Yep.
But at least now you know. And when you're trading for guys, I suppose this is something that is good to know too. You're trading for dudes with maybe you could try and trade for, defensemen with term. You already know what Willie's going to cost you. So you have certainty in your cap structure going forward and what can and can't work without real, being like, oh, but what if Willie wants this? What if Willie wants that? Well, now you have that answer. So you're right. In terms of building out the roster for this year at the deadline and keeping somewhat of an eye on next year as well, you are right where I think this deal happening now does benefit the Leafs in that perspective from a roster building standpoint that way. All right, pal. Let's wrap. First and foremost, actually, okay, there is a game tonight. Leaf Sharks, enjoy it. Murray Jones is going to get the start. That's our preview.
Honestly, we saw this team the last a couple days ago. It's gonna just do what you did last time. You're gonna win the game again.
That's right. 3 keys: defend, keep moving the feet, be aggressive in the offensive end, shoot everything you can on goal. And they should come away with another 2 points against the San Jose Sharks. Just copy paste that performance. Martin Jones, like we said, going to get the start. When we're going to see Hildeby, I don't know. I'm thinking there's a back-to-back this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. You got the Avs coming to town on Saturday, and then Detroit on Sunday. That Detroit game might be the play to get Dennis Hildeby in net for his first game in the NHL. But for now, Martin Jones, the NHL second star of the week. Congratulations to him after a monstrous week down in California. Hopefully he continues that back here in Toronto. They've got the Sharks tonight at 7 p.m. So enjoy that game, folks. Again, apologies for going a little long-winded on this one here, but it's big news when one of the best players on your team signs a big long-term deal. There's lots of implications to talk through it, and I'm sure we'll probably be talking about it a little bit more over the next little bit as well. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment down below as well. And we'll get back tomorrow with another episode. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.